So, a little different video than normal, but needless to say, we just sold Lauren's Lexus. We did things a little bit backwards by buying the Audi S3 before the Lexus sold. Lexus just sold, and it was a cash buyer. I've never had this much cash in real life in real bills. Now, before anybody gets ahead of themselves, by the time this video goes live, all this cash is completely gone in the bank and going towards the Audi.
Poof, it's gone, it's all gone.
So like I said, we did things a little bit backwards. We went ahead and bought the Audi S3 just because there was no way we were gonna find another first gen painted in this Riviera blue. This is pretty much a one of one, her favorite color. We just had to get this car, came from California, went ahead and bought it, and then we had the Lexus for sale. Now I made a video of why we decided to buy the S3, and I said that there was not a single thing that deterred us from doing this. It was like everything just lined up, it was the best decision. There was one little bit of a worrying issue. What if the used car market crashes before the Lexus sells? That was something we were a little concerned with. Obviously, right now, used car prices are insane. That's why we got, honestly, a ton of cash for that car right now. But used car values are really high right now. And while we paid a lot more for this than it was 2 years ago, we were able to sell the Lexus for a lot more than it was worth 2 years ago as well. So we went ahead and bought this. Luckily, the market didn't really change. We got the Lexus out, and it wasn't a crazy difference to swap into this new car. So in today's video, I'm gonna talk about a few different things basically relating to this crazy used car market. The first thing we're gonna go over is why I decided to actually buy a used car right now since prices are so high. Then I'm gonna get into why it's important to buy a car rather than leasing it, because especially in today's market, there are some astronomical differences. And then I'm gonna finish up the video going over some tips, basically based off of observations that I've made in the last 2 years with how car pricing has been. Now, as far as some backstory on me, I actually worked at a car dealership for 3 years and I was the inventory manager. So used car values were the thing that I specialized in. It was very easy for me to price cars, value cars, know what they're gonna be depreciated to in a few years from now. So I'm really good at this, honestly, with the money and how it works. And buying a used car right now isn't the most recommended thing. However, if we get into a little bit about like buying versus leasing, if you own a car right now, it's worth some money, especially if you bought it 2 years ago or later. So Lauren's Lexus, she bought that brand new in 2017, and today's value is a lot more than it was just 2 years ago. So we sold it for $32,000. 2 years ago, when she and I first started talking kind of about what we were gonna do with our future cars, her car was only worth like $22,000. So it was a huge hit. She spent 50 grand on that car brand new. And if she had sold it 2 years ago, that would have been an astronomical loss. Today's market, since it's higher, she sold it for a pretty decent money, only an $18,000 loss over 6 years of ownership. So since that car was worth some good money, it made sense actually to trade it in technically for the S3. And again, if we look 2 years ago, this car is probably worth 27 grand, her car was worth 22 grand. Today's market, this car was 37 grand and her car was worth 32 grand. So the difference actually ended up being the same. It was still a $5,000 difference whether we had done this 2 years ago or today. So while we bought a car at a high price, much higher than normal, we sold her car for a higher than normal price to where the 5 grand didn't make any difference. And that's something very important, I think, and we see a lot of the, the top percentage, the top earners, they own assets, and that's why they're able to make money in a bad market and in a good market. So for normal people like you guys and myself, we can still capitalize on making those decisions by having cars. If you own something versus leasing, I'll get into the numbers in just a second, but owning a car, like she owned the car, she bought the Lexus, paid it off in about 4 years, and it was just basically an asset sitting there. And since it was worth money, we were able to turn that around and get into the next car, and we were kind of able to deflect the inflated pricing. Obviously, if you're going in it right now buying your first ever car, you've got to deal with the high prices. But at least for anybody who has a car from years ago, now is actually a pretty decent time to trade it in for the next car, just because your car's higher, even though the other car's higher, the difference is all the same. I've seen a few things saying the used car market is starting to go downhill, so I'm really glad we were able to unload her car before that happened, obviously since we had that difference outstanding. So now I want to get into the importance to owning a car. And what we've noticed in the last 2 years, a lot of cars have actually earned a higher return than the stock market. I have played with the stock market a little bit over the years and I've lost every single time. However, I was able to use this market to my advantage. My Toyota Supra, I owned that for 2 years, sold it for more than I paid. My R35 Nissan GTR, that is currently my tripod right now, This thing has made a ton of money over time because of what it is, and this market especially has made this thing shoot up. Looking at so many other cars, cars have really appreciated. So if you own a car, owning that asset, you are able to really capitalize on that. So I wrote down some numbers. Had Lauren leased her Lexus, this is the craziest thing, and for those of you who have a current lease right now, you might get a little upset with how much money you are wasting. So looking at current Lexus leases for a $50,000 car, right now they're asking $5,000 down, 36 month with good credit, and it's a $700 monthly payment. So had Lauren done that when she bought her car, 3 years later she would have then traded in for another one. Each of those lease periods, you would have spent $30,000 and you get nothing in return because you give the car back, you're done. So had she leased her car, traded in for the next one 3 years later, over 6 years, she would have spent $60,000 and had nothing to show for it. Instead, she was able to finance her car for 0% interest. She got it at the end of the year, so she got a really good deal on that. 6 years later, she sold it for $32,000, which is only an $18,000 loss. And it would have been so much worse in a normal market. But that was the loss, $18,000 in 6 years versus $60,000 in 6 years had she leased it. On top of that, the $32,000, obviously we roll it into this car, 37 grand, so that is a difference of $5,000. So at the end of the day, this is a $23,000 purchase basically. If you look at the cash from the old car and the difference, had she leased the car and bought this outright today, that's a $93,000 purchase. So for those of you who are leasing cars, you are absolutely throwing money down the tube. It's insane, the price difference. Anybody can lease a $50,000 car. It's really nothing hard. Most people can honestly buy one. It's not that hard to buy a car like that. And for people leasing it, they're just wasting so much money to where, I mean, this car would be $93,000 worth of loss in 6 years instead of 20-something grand. So there's a really big price difference with people who are leasing cars and people who are buying cars. And the market doesn't really affect the lease, obviously, which could be good, could be bad, but at least in today's market, you know, had she leased it, that would have just been money down the tubes, and then this car would have been a lot of money to then spend on top of a drastic loss over 6 years. So from our experience, it really does pay to own something rather than renting it, especially when the market goes downhill like it has in the last 2 years. And even had the market been normal, even though it would have been another 10 grand loss on that Lexus, that is still an astronomical difference compared to leasing. And it seems like in today's world, everything's pushing people to rent homes, rent apartments, rent cars. Owning is a really important thing. And what I've been observing, just kind of watching videos of people who are at the top, obviously with Lamborghinis and crazy money to play with, owning is a really, really big thing. And even normal people, you know, buying cars way under 100 grand, a lot of people can really get ahead by doing that because, you know, the average person losing $93,000, that doesn't seem appealing. However, the average person spending 20-something grand over 6 years for 2 cars, that's a lot more affordable. So with all that said, I think my tip for people who are new to car buying at this time, which is a pretty crappy time to have to buy your first car, but I think buying a brand new car at MSRP is the best option, as long as it's a car that isn't really prone to depreciation. You know, her Lexus, those things don't really hold too much value. A brand new Kia, those aren't gonna hold value. People who are spending 10 grand over sticker on, you know, a Kia K5, they are going to be absolutely tanked in a couple years when everything gets back to normal or even crashes lower. So buy something that is that sticker and something that's kind of worth the money. Don't get just a basic boring car, because honestly 40 grand can go a long way towards all sorts of different cars. Even when I worked at the dealership years ago, you know, people were buying brand new Kia Optimas for $35,000. 2 years later, I was seeing them at auction for 17 grand. However, we were selling used Audi S4s for 35 grand. Even a couple extra years older, it was still the same price. So you gotta be really strategic when you're buying a car to get something that's gonna hold some value. This will be interesting because when the market does crash, it's probably gonna go back down to under $30,000. However, our kind of take on that was, if the market crashes, we would much rather lose our butts on a car we really, really want to keep even long term. This car is a heck of a lot of fun, and I don't really care if the market crashes. We'll just keep this for a really long time and just enjoy it. The Lexus, she was done with it. I wasn't too big of a fan of that car because there's no performance to it. So at least we were able to get into something that if it crashes, we have something that's a lot more fun. But in today's market, I think a new cool car, you know, Toyota 4Runner, Toyota Tacoma, those hold value insanely well. Decently affordable if you go with a more lower trim level. Something like that, brand new, would be a great way to go in today's market. If you can afford a little bit more expensive cars, something that's a little bit more special, like newer S4s, something like that, Ford Raptors, Corvettes, Shelby Mustangs, anything like that, obviously that's a little bit expensive. If you can get it for MSRP, those are money makers. But that's kind of my take on it. There's a lot of craziness right now in the used car market. A big unfortunate thing about it is it kind of did push the exotic cars farther and farther away. Lamborghini Huracans were like 150 grand 2 years ago. As of right now, I could have stretched to buy one right now by trading in the GTR and not buying the new Z. But now those same Huracans are like $250,000. So they're just out of reach. And unfortunately, the normal people like us, we can't get those cars just yet because they're now even more expensive. But at least we can play with the normal cars and make pretty good financial decisions even in a really crappy economy and still buy and sell cars as long as you're kind of owning them. For those of you who bought a car years ago, like we were mentioning with the Lexus years ago, you can still buy a nice car right now and swap it into it. It's the same difference. But today, I think just a nice, normal car that's gonna hold some value at MSRP isn't a bad way to go. Or a good used car, something like this doesn't break the bank. And if the economy does take another turn for the worse, it might lose some money, but at least you can still get into something kind of cool. So there's my take on the crazy used car market. I'd really love to hear you guys' thoughts. What are your experiences buying and selling cars over the last 2 years? Luckily for us, it worked out nicely to swap the Lexus for the Audi, get into something that's a heck of a lot more fun, and worst case, we're stuck with a car that we really, really enjoy. So not the worst thing in the world. Obviously, it's a crazy market right now, but I think it's a good learning lesson to really, truly work towards owning your car, not leasing because you just throw out so much money. And in general, I think being able to buy some things that you can then sell when the market goes up is a really good way to kind of keep yourself ahead of the game. Obviously, we're not all immune to inflated prices and the crazy economy right now. It sucks. I'd much rather enjoy the previous years where things were booming. But at the same time, though, you can kind of work it to your advantage. And as long as you have some things that you can trade in for the next things, you can kind of offset that just a little bit. But I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts. What are your experiences? Have you bought brand new cars for sticker? Have you bought some really good deals on used cars? What have you found to be a good way to still be able to buy and sell cars and have the fun cars that you enjoy? And I'm curious, what are your guys' thoughts? Do you think the market is going to crash, or is it just going to taper off and get more back to a normal level as production from the manufacturer starts picking up? I kind of think it's going to be a blend of both. I'm seeing a small dip in certain prices on a few things. I don't think we'll see a crazy crash. However, a lot of people have been buying brand new cars for way over sticker, $100,000 Ford Broncos and things like that. Those people are going to absolutely lose their butts if things get to normal, especially if things crash. So crazy market, crazy time, and I think we can really use this to sit back and observe and learn some lessons for the next economic boom. Capitalize, buy some good things, then when it crashes, sell things and get some cash out of it. So that's it for today's video. Hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to give the video a thumbs up, hit that subscribe button, stay tuned for plenty more automotive content, and I'll see you guys in the next video.